Okay guys, in today's video we're going to be taking another look at VeChain. There's a few things that are happening right now for VeChain that are really crucial. So we're going to get into this and we're going to show you exactly what I'm seeing inside this data for this technical analysis on VeChain. Guys, as we get into it, if you find it useful and informative, hit the like button. I really do appreciate that. If you're new, make sure you've subscribed, hit the bell, tap on all notifications, and you won't miss another VeChain update. Right, let's get into what is going on here with VeChain and what is so critical about right now. So the first thing we want to do is actually just talk about this weekly view for VeChain. Obviously, we have those 5 impulse waves to the upside. We obviously can see that wave 4 has come down quite nicely into a pretty good area. The yellow area on the chart just up here is the buy zone. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. The first thing we want to talk about is obviously how these 5 impulse waves are formed. Obviously, we have the beginning of the bull run back in March during the crash of March 2020. And obviously the signaled wave 1 in. Wave 1 kind of peaked out in August, and anyone who was around with VeChain back then could remember those all-time highs being set. This actually was due to then obviously have a correction wave for wave 2 came in here and kind of finished and completed in November. So basically we were going pretty much down and sideways from the basically the high up here of August of 2020 down to basically kind of mid to late November for VeChain. Now, ultimately, that was a few months of kind of going down and sideways, and this is exactly what we're seeing right now. Obviously, starting off 2021 was really, really good, and obviously we saw wave 3 come in. Wave 3 kind of peaked out up there in April, and right now we're in wave 4, obviously from April getting corrected down to July. So again, several months in the same way that we saw from wave 1 to wave 2. So obviously our expectations are that wave 5 is going to be a significant run in the same way that wave 3 was. So obviously where we are having this correction coming down to the way that it has done at the moment is absolutely crucial. It's something that you need to happen in the crypto space in order to take that next step to the upside. Obviously this does worry a lot of people. It was a very sharp correction after all, but this is something that's very standard for wave 4, and specifically if wave 2 was flat. So wave 2 in the case of VeChain was flat, so wave 4 had to be sharp. So we saw a very sharp decrease in the value of VeChain, and that was absolutely natural and is again in line with Elliott theory. Nothing here is out of the ordinary at this point. The buy zone down here, we'll get into that on the hourly in a moment, is obviously where we are right now. And this is potentially the last opportunity to really get into VeChain before we actually kickstart wave 5. And there's a few things for this, or why I think this. And the first thing obviously we want to talk about is going to be the first indicator. So we're going to throw on that stochastic relative strength index. And this one does show us the momentum, okay? It's obviously fine-tuned to price movements. And one of the things I'm just going to talk to you guys about is obviously what we're seeing in all of this data. Obviously, during the crash of March 2020, we could see that we were all the way down here, right down at that lower bound on this chart. It was about 0, a little bit higher than 0 actually, about can't even get the needle in the right place. Yeah, it's just a little bit north of 0, and I would say 0.4 on that stochastic relative strength index. Okay, so right down at the bottom here, you're right under, you're basically oversold, right, for several weeks, and that's pretty much what happened during this particular crash in March of 2020. Obviously, we rode this up to the top of wave 1, and that's where things got really interesting and reached 100 on the scale. Obviously, when you're at the top end and you're overbought, there's only one place to go, and that's going to be to the downside. So what you saw here is this stochastic come all the way back down to where it was to the March levels, okay? Obviously, the price didn't come all the way down because there's many different factors for this. Ultimately, the sentiment in the market was not extreme fear or anything like that. It was a correction wave that was kind of due. You had your correction on your stochastic relative strength index indicating that momentum in the space. And ultimately, we found a good bottom just here, which was obviously the previous resistance area over here. So ultimately, you found a good support line where previously there was resistance. So right now, obviously, in terms of this second wave correction, we bottomed out right the way down here back towards that 0 level on the stochastic RSI. Obviously, we then went into wave 3, a significant run as we saw the price of VeChain rise significantly all the way up to, if I get this right, 27.9 cents. And during this particular wave, we saw the stochastic do several things. We actually saw it rise all the way back up to where it was previously during the wave 1 highs, but also had a bit of a pullback just around the middle here from a momentum perspective, finding this upper resistance area before actually getting a second leg and a second rally up to that peaking of the wave 3. Then it obviously had a pullback down here. Now, obviously, where we are right now is in the same position what we were when we were at the bottom of wave 2 and at the bottom of wave 1. So ultimately, there's only one place to go from this particular point in time on the stochastic RSI, and that is to push the price up to the upside. So this stochastic has to rise, and it most likely will on these weekly charts over the next few months to back being up above 100. But this would be the peak of the bull run and the end of the 5th wave. So our expectations now are to see that there is one last accumulation before we do absolutely kickstart things off with that last wave. Now, obviously, time's the hardest thing to gauge. I think we're going to see a slow and gradual motion into wave 5. I don't think we're going to see a sharp increase. I think we're going to see a very slow motion to move on up there. But ultimately, it looks like the bottom for VeChain has come in, and it is very unlikely that we're likely to push down any lower, mainly because the stochastic RSI isn't going to allow you to fall down all much too further. And the same thing happens for Bitcoin. When you take a look at Bitcoin on the stochastic RSI, it's very, very difficult to see Bitcoin fall down to lower levels when your stochastic RSI is already at 0. It's incredibly difficult to do. So you have to first rise the price up, you waste a lot of the relative strength index space on the charts here, and then dump the price down further. So before you are able to push down any lower, you first of all have to push up. So the expectations are now to actually have a bit of a bump in price. Whether or not this is going to be long-lived or short-lived is obviously what we're going to discuss later on. But right now, the charts are indicating that we've reached a bottom and we do have to push the price of VeChain up, specifically on this weekly chart. So the next thing we want to talk about is going to be the normal, regular RSI, that relative strength index. Now, when we take a look at this one, and I will just make this a little bit easier to see with the yellow lines rather than the purple. Ultimately, you can see that actually we're right down here at a 45.9. And again, 45.9 puts us at the bottom of where wave 2 bottomed out as well. So again, not as low as we were during the March crash, but just as low as we were with wave 2 is where we are right now on wave 4. So there's always a little bit more to go, but ultimately that stochastic's at 1. So it's not got a lot more room left to fall down. So that momentum has really come out now. So we're looking to see some potential moves to the upside on VeChain. So really wanted to kind of call that one out. Okay, so let's jump down into our daily, and obviously the daily shows us what our expectations are on some of the smaller time frames, right? So let's take the weekly one out of the equation and let's start taking a look at the daily. Now we have got a downward trend line that's been very much a resistance trend for quite some time. This actually started off way up here during the 7th of May, and obviously we've been hitting this area of resistance consistently. The good news, guys, is that we have found a triangular wedge. We have this area at the bottom here where we have 2 touch points on a resistance trend line to the upside. It's quite a steady one, but it's there. And obviously today we've also retested this trend line as well. And that means that ultimately we are getting really tight now inside this triangular wedge, and there's a huge opportunity for an explosion to the upside. When we take a look at that relative strength index on our daily chart, and we can see that actually this is at the 32 level. Anything lower than 30 on a daily chart is obviously going to be oversold. So I can of course go ahead and throw on our stochastic RSI as well, and you can see it is right in the floor where it has been previously. So the expectations here are that VeChain cannot really go all too much lower before we absolutely have to have that explosion to the upside. Now obviously timing, as I said, is hard, but obviously when we have an intersection like this, and you can see that the 21st you have your downward trend line intersecting with your upward trend line, you know something absolutely has to happen. You're either going to get a break to the downside or you're going to have a break to the upside. Now ultimately, considering there isn't much room to fall down, the only thing really to happen here is to push the price of VeChain up. So my expectations are by the 23rd of July, if not sooner, we're going to see an explosion with VeChain, pushing the price of VeChain much higher. So again, we're going to be looking for a breakout event, and this is again pretty common across most of the altcoins and including Bitcoin at this point, that we are expecting to see some significant rally in price. Now ultimately, as I said, time is the hardest thing. VeChain, we have the benefit of this triangular wedge to help us gear us in the right direction. So again, really good news there. Obviously the yellow box at this top end area, this is where we're looking to get a closed candle above. This comes in at 21.5 cent, I believe. Let me just put that up there. Yeah, 21.5 cent. If we can get above 21.5 cent with a closed candle, that's going to be the strongest signal to push the price of VeChain to the upside that we will see for wave 5. Ultimately, this particular scenario is going to be best served on a weekly closed candle. So a weekly closed candle above that point is going to be a very strong signal for all the bulls out there. So we're mindful of that, and I have that on the chart so we can be aware of what's going on. And of course, the last thing that you can see in the background here, guys, is the Fibonacci retracement tool, and obviously we have the extensions on, so we can see the first price target or next high that we're looking for is going to be 42.1, followed by 64.9, 87.7, and then $1.01 is the top end for VeChain. And again, that is in line with the 5th wave that we have from our weekly chart. So let's jump down into our hourly view and talk about what's going on most recently. Okay, so as we can come down here, we can see this downward trend and how we've been hitting this upper bound of resistance. And here we can see this upward trend just down here where we have found it as a good support line. We've tested this today. We've rebounded from it. But guys, we have been inside this accumulation zone, this yellow box area, only a handful of times. And this is the last opportunity, in my opinion, of actually accumulating a significant portion at a discounted rate. As we formed inside this triangular wedge just here, this is the accumulation zone. Anything basically below 6.8 cent really, or 6.9 cent. Anything in here is basically your accumulation. And ultimately, we've only been in here a handful of times. As I said, we had this opportunity down here. We had this brief one over here, and then we obviously had the initial crash this side. But ultimately, when we take a look at it, we can see that we have already started to push up on that stochastic RSI from this lower bound. We'll probably be inside here for a little while before we absolutely have that break to the upside. Okay, so again, we're not saying that everything's lined up and geared up, ready to go just yet, but things have been working specifically on that weekly chart and that daily chart. Things are ready. This hourly chart, obviously, we have a reasonable stochastic RSI, okay, when it's already up here. So chances are that we'll push a little bit higher, fall back down, hopefully retest this. It's crucial that we actually have this trend line at the bottom working for us. And again, we'll probably be just working our way in here until everything lines up perfectly for that break. Now, if of course this trend line doesn't hold and we actually push down much lower, then ultimately, you know, the weekly and of course the daily charts are still working for us. It just means that actually we need to reconsider where our breaking point is. Is it in fact the 21st, or has it moved? Okay, there's no doubt as to whether or not we're going to get the breakup. It's all about timing and whether or not we have to move our upward trend line in line with the recent trades. Okay, and ultimately it just delays the inevitable of the break to the upside. Okay, but the expectations are that you cannot drop down much lower. We have good support at 4.6 if we were to ever need it, but I think ultimately it's very unlikely that we're going to drop down below 5.2, which is the previous low of wave 4. Very, very unlikely. I don't think the weekly chart or the daily charts are really going to allow that to happen. So although we have lots of room on these smaller time frames, right? So obviously when you take a look at the stochastic on an hourly chart, it looks like you could drop all the way down, no problem. But when you actually start comparing this to the dailies and the weeklies, it just doesn't allow it to happen, and in which case you end up with these breaks to the upside. So be mindful, guys, that we do want this to hold, because it means that we'll get this break a little bit earlier. If it doesn't, then you'll be able to enjoy a little bit more of this accumulation, and we'll get the break at a later stage. For me, there's no doubt in my mind that we are moving VeChain to the north, and it won't be going down any lower. And this is just due to the fact that, as I said before, on that weekly chart, it's pretty much impossible to go any lower on that stochastic RSI. It's pretty much at the bottom now. You just cannot really push it any lower in line with everything else that we've been talking about. So again, the expectations here, even on this hourly chart, would just be to try to hold this the best we can and then get that break to the upside. So everything on VeChain is going ahead and according to plan. There isn't anything that's really deviated away from that. Ultimately, timing is always the hardest thing to get, and we have a good stab here. As long as support holds, that 21st of July should be a pretty good day, or thereabouts, for a breakout to the upside, and we should start to see a significant, hopefully, run with VeChain. Obviously, it's going to be an uphill battle. It's not something that you're going to see instantaneous. You're not going to see a straight line to the upside. You'll probably end up seeing, some interesting kind of sideways trades until eventually we get this break at this point here. Once you get above this point, which could be, late October, you'll then start talking about going up to these price targets, these new all-time highs. But for that, you're going to really struggle to get past initially a lot of these resistance points that we've been finding. So we're going to take some time just to kind of work our way up to these areas and then get that breakthrough of this yellow boxed area here. And once we're past there, that's when we'll start seeing significant runs for VeChain. Guys, hopefully you have found this brief update for VeChain useful and informative. If you have, hit the like button. I really do appreciate that. If you're new, make sure that you subscribe and you stay up to date with all of those VeChain updates. Hit the bell, tap on all notifications, and you won't miss a single thing. Guys, with this said, done, and out of the way, I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend, and we'll catch you all in the next one.